Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Musings from the Shop, because silence is consent, and it's way past time to make some noise, and lots of it. I want to talk about a few things here. A lot of things been happening, really too much to cover in one session here. Everything from the trade war to rattlings of sabers, with our northern neighbors. I mean, it's just it's ridiculous what's going on with this with this current administration. But I wanted to talk about a little bit more of a humanitarian thing. As we all know, there have been many devastating storms that have been tearing across our country and causing widespread damage. And many of those storms have been occurring in areas that we refer to as red states, states that typically vote Republican, states that voted for Donald Trump, and they are really getting hit by the brunt of a lot of this damage. As I mentioned in a previous segment, there were states like North Carolina and West Virginia that suffered heavy damage from a Hurricane Helene. And when they applied for FEMA relief, they were turned down by the Trump administration. Lately, Arkansas has also suffered serious storm damage from multiple tornadoes that tore across that state. And the governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who used to work for the previous Trump administration in his first term, she did what most governors would do. She applied for FEMA relief to help with the cleanup and the rebuilding. And she was also summarily denied relief from FEMA. Not from FEMA itself, but from Donald Trump and his administration. They were given no reason. They were given no explanations. All they heard was no. And any pleas to reconsider are simply falling on deaf ears. You know, sometimes I have a hard time. I've said it before. I'm not a mean person. I really tend to be a bit compassionate toward people who are going through a hard time. But I really have a hard time ginning up a whole lot of sympathy for many of these people, because many of them are the same people who laughed and cheered when Donald Trump denied FEMA relief to California for the wildfires, the devastating wildfires that swept across that state. He also denied Washington State, and I think Oregon as well. He denied relief for a severe system of storms that we had last winter that also caused a lot of damage across the state. You know, I don't know. When I think of the typical Trump supporter, I can't help but think of when my son was young. He was a toddler, and at the time we lived in a house that had a wood burning stove that was our primary source of heat. And this stove, it sat up on a brick hearth that was probably elevated, I don't know, probably about a foot or so off the level of the floor. And as my son was beginning to learn how to crawl and then to start pulling himself up onto furniture to stand, he kept heading for that stove. And of course, we would intercept him and we would tell him, no, hot. And then we would steer him in, we would take him to another location in the room, but before you know it, he'd be heading right back at the stove. And one day I was watching him by myself, and he just would not leave the stove alone, in spite of several admonitions on my part, even followed by an occasional swat on the rear end to get the point across, he would still make a beeline for that hot stove. And it occurred to me that he just wasn't getting it because he really had no frame of reference as to what the word hot meant. It's kind of like trying to describe for somebody who has never tasted the flavor of salt. Well, how do you describe what salt tastes like? Well, it's salty. Well, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. Okay. The only way you can really understand what salt tastes like is to taste salt. And it was the same way with my son. He had no frame of reference as to what the word hot meant. So I had to do something that was kind of tough. As he made a beeline once again for that stove, I sat there and I watched him. And he braced his hands against the top of the hearth and he pulled himself up to a standing position, kind of steadying himself against the hearth. And then he reached out his hand and he touched the stove. Well, let's just say that the lesson was instantly driven home. Of course, the tears started and the wailing, and of course I jumped up and I grabbed him and I took him right into the kitchen and ran his hand under the cold water tap. And once we got things under control, he was not seriously burned. His finger was red, but that's about it. But after I got him all dried off and everything, and I then took him back to the stove, and I pointed at it, and I said, hot. And then you could see the light going on. He understood what hot meant. He had experienced it. Of course, as parents, we kind of abused that for a while, for as long as we could. Anytime that he went after something that we just simply didn't want him to mess with, well, we'd say, no, hot, and oh man, he'd do a course correction right then and there. But I think that that many people who support Donald Trump do so because they themselves have not experienced the pain that is caused by his policies. They have fueled a furnace, if you will. They stoked it on hatred, anger, bigotry, ignorance, and lies. And now suddenly they are getting burned by that very same furnace that they so carefully stoked. They embraced his cruelty as long as it was aimed at someone else. Now they themselves are feeling the pain and suffering that his cruelty brings. Many of them are now finding out the hard way that Trump just doesn't care about them. He never did. He looked upon them, his supporters, as merely a tool, a means to get elected. And why did he want to be elected? He didn't really want to be president. He doesn't want anything to do with doing the job. Oh, he wants the prestige that goes along with it. But the main reason that he had to win the presidency was for one reason only, and that was to keep him from going to prison. He knew that he was on his way, and if he didn't win the presidency, his next stop instead of the White House was going to be the Big House. So, of course, he used these people, ginned up their anger, ginned up their hatred, fed on their bigotry, in order to get them to vote for him and to put him once again into the Oval Office. But now, like any other tool that has become worn out or somehow outlived its usefulness, they are now being relegated to the scrap heap. We have to remember one thing about Donald Trump. One thing. And that is that Donald Trump only cares about one person. And that's Donald Trump. Anybody else is expendable. That's all I have for now, folks. If you agree, please hit like and subscribe and share. That's how we get the word out. And y'all keep it between the ditches.